Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Midlife Revolution. I'm your host, Megan Connor, and today I am joined by Nathan Hinkley of the Bishop's Interview. Hey, Nathan.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's so good to have you here. I have seen you around the internet on the different channels that we kind of all follow, and I'm so excited to be having a one-on-one conversation with you today.
I appreciate that. That I was just thinking about that this morning, how we connect, a lot of us in this space, like weekly, and how even when I was a full believing member, you're like, we didn't do that, like you did what you had to do. But I love this community, especially in the podcast world, and how we support each other. And so I saw you last night for a brief moment. Unfortunately, where I live I'm in East Tennessee, so a lot of things end up being pretty late, pretty
Yeah.
late for us. But I do see some of the live things and stuff like that, so it's fun.
Yeah, that Tuesday night show is hard for me because Tuesday is a really long day and that's really late at night. And we sometimes go for an hour, sometimes we go for 2 hours. And last night, by the end of it, I was just wiped out. So I had to go. And what I love is kind of the hangout afterwards, after we turn off the live stream and we just hang out and talk.
Oh,
That's my favorite part. I've gotten some really fun conversations and some fun meetups that way, but I just couldn't do it last night. It was too much.
well, I've caught that Tuesday show. Of course, it's with Gene from Latter Day Digest. I've caught it a few times now, but I'll admit it. I'm usually laying in bed, and it's it's midnight or something, so
Yeah.
I don't usually chime in all that much.
Yeah, and Gene's like, "Come in the studio," and you're like, "I'm already asleep."
Okay, I'll tell on myself. Last night I said, I can't, I'm naked. That's a different story.
Yeah.
I was about to head to the hot tub.
Well, we always love the inside scoop. It's always fun to know what's going on. Well, can you just start by telling us a little bit about you, about how you got to where you are, how the Bishop's Interview came to be? I'm just curious about all those details.
Okay. Well, stop me whenever you need to. But so I guess the beginning would be that I was born in Utah, but my parents moved us to the South when I was a little baby. So I don't remember anything about that. My parents, I was born in Layton, which consequently I have a son named Layton now. But anyway, my parents came to the South chasing a music dream. So they were musicians. They played mostly country music or rock and roll. They ended up landing in Nashville for a little while, but in Knoxville, Tennessee, for most of our lives growing up. They worked at a place called Dollywood. I don't know if you've heard of that. But it's Dolly Parton's theme park. So they played music there for about 20 years, as well as in local bars and just a lot of places. They were a music duo. And I don't know, Megan, if you have the ability to let me share a screen, but I'll share
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Go for it.
I'll share this little. This was the first time that me and my brother and my sister, we appeared on my parents' album. They went by the name PJ and Greg. Just Kidding Around was this particular album where they had brought in their children. They had brought in their children for that particular album. So they did country. They did music, country, rock, different things. And so music has always been a really, important kind of part of my life, and still is.
Yeah,
And
that album cover is iconic. Can you share it again? Is it possible? Can we
of
look at it
course.
again?
Let me pull it back up here. Let's see here. Present. Okay, here we go. There it is. Yep. So that's my dad and my mom on the sides. My older brother is right there beside my dad. Then that's me. And then my sister. Now, we had a younger brother that came after this, who is
Okay.
also very musical. And I'll go ahead and tell you that my two brothers and I, later in life, obviously, we created a brothers band, and
Oh, wow.
we were known as the Hinkley brothers.
Oh,
You can find us on iTunes and different places. They are both faithful LDS currently, and in the past 2 years, I have stepped away, and so I can't minimize the the I guess the weight of that whole decision, from my brother's band to so many different things. But so music was a large part of our of our life, and my parents, even though they sang in bars and things like that, they never lived that lifestyle, if you will.
yeah.
They were always, faithful members. We always attended church. We did all the things that good Mormon folks do. And I love my family. They're also good. Now, my sister, who you see in the bottom there, she stepped away from the church when I was bishop, and we might talk about that a little bit later. So I was bishop from about 2012 or 13 from till 5 years later, so 17, 18, whatever it was. And that was tough. That was really tough for me at that time.
I'm sure. I just
But
wanted to bring this back up because I love the matching. I love the hairstyles. I mean, this reminds me a lot of my family because my mom used to make my sister and I matching dresses for Easter and Christmas and stuff. And then the boys always had to coordinate somehow. So I'm reveling in this album cover because it's nostalgia for me. I love it. It's great.
It was fun, and this was their attempt to kind of bring the family into it. They had a lot of their own albums, which were just the two of them. My dad's a great songwriter and a great person. Just we've had our rocky times the past 2 years, but I would just say that I love them dearly. And
Yeah.
so, anyways, that brought us to the South. I'll do some fast forwarding. I did all the things that a good Mormon boy does. I was an Eagle Scout. My dad was the scoutmaster for most of our lives growing up. My older brother, led the way. He was Eagle Scout. When mission time rolled around, I served a mission just like my brother did, just like my dad did. I served in Argentina, so I learned the Spanish language. And of course, I should also mention that I had a girlfriend when I was several months shy of my 16th birthday, and her name was
Scandalous.
her name was Amy, and her name is Amy, and we met in church at she was about an hour away. And so we met at church activities. Back then, our state did a lot of church softball, church basketball, things like this. And so we met back then. She is my wife. So we dated until my mission. And 6 weeks after my mission, I know that sounds pretty quick, but 6 weeks after my mission, we were married in the Atlanta temple.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, 6 weeks after your mission might sound like a lot to people who've never been Mormon, but for those of us who are raised in the faith, it's not untypical, right, for a couple who was together before the mission
Right.
to get married right away afterwards. I'm just glad she didn't dear John you while you were gone.
No, she stayed quite. We stayed faithful to each other. There was one time that I was fearing that was happening, but honestly, it was a mail mix up. Of course, we would mail letters, and there went like 5 or 6 weeks. I'm like, what the heck is going on? But anyways, Megan, I've always been a rule follower for the most part. The more that I've been thinking about my life, I feel like I may have some religious OCD type traits about myself. Not to say that I was perfect, but I was fully in. Just to give you an idea, being a Mormon in the South is different than a lot of people, their experience might be out west or whatever. And you put if you're faithful, you put you put yourself out there, and so I had an a cappella group in high school, and we would sing, a lot of doo-wop and different a cappella type things. Well, we would sing at a lot of churches, Baptist churches and Methodist churches, and just whatever was local. And there was one particular time we had showed up at a Baptist church as guests. I was the only Mormon, of course, in the group and anyone there. And the preacher was preaching his sermon, and we were to go on after him. And he preached something about, some people might say that if you're Mormon, you're going to heaven. And I want to tell you that the Bible says, and he just kind of downed us for a second. Well, I stand up as a invited guest in a place that I do not know. And I said, "Preacher, you are dead wrong. And if you ever want to talk about this, you give me a call." And I walked out. I mean,
Wow.
I lived the gospel. Now, if I were perfectly honest, I would say, there were I had weaknesses. Word of wisdom, no, that was a strength, like to the T. With my girlfriend, did we get a little too close a couple times and I had to go talk to the bishop? Yes. But for the most part, I loved and lived the gospel, and so anyways, that takes me to, we're married, we start having kids. We've had, 5 pregnancies, 4 kids. We had 1 stillborn child. But early on in our life, I think I was 22 or maybe 23, something like that. I was called into the bishopric. So I served as a counselor. Yeah, pretty young. Let's see, was that, I think that would have been about the right age. I was first counselor to a bishop in our ward who was also a doctor. He was kind of, so our ward is made up, half of our ward is related to my wife's family, kind of like everyone is cousins and things. The other half are all associated with the college that's in our ward boundaries, which there's a medical school here, which brings a lot of people from out west or different places. So anyways, that particular bishop was a doctor and also an instructor at the college. So I was his counselor for a little while, and then I became bishop in 2000, I think it was 12 or 13, served for 5 years. Enjoyed it, never had doubts or anything like that. Never really had any members that came at me with doubts either. However, I mentioned earlier that my sister left the church during this time. And I know there were many times that I spoke about her, not by name, but in my mind, I would refer to. And I would tell people we have to stay close to the trunk of the tree and not get out in the branches. I would always talk about staying close. And Joseph Smith had a quote, apparently, that was similar to staying close to the trunk of the tree and not getting off in the branches. So I would deal with that, and I would speak about that a lot. And then I had a cousin on my wife's side. His name is also Nathan. And he and his wife left the church. And this devastated me because how sincere and just awesome this couple was. Consequently, I have done an interview on my channel with him, and it's one of the things I'm maybe most proud about. It was an in-person interview, very much like what you would think of as like a Mormon Stories type interview.
Yeah.
With actual cameras instead of webcams, and just really. So I'm actually in the video business in my professional. I have a videography business, so I have gear and things like that. But anyways, this particular couple And the episode is called Mile Marker 356, I think is what it was. And basically, when Nathan, in his job, when he arrived at this mile marker 356, it hit him simply, what if it's not true? And so he goes through and kind of tells about how he got to that point. But the part that was so hard for me to process was how sincere and how faithful this. He was actually a bishop when we served as bishop during the same time.
Wow.
And shortly after, they lost a baby as well. And then shortly after that, they stepped away from the church. And so between that couple's story and my own sister's story, there was one particular time that I was not really arguing, but trying to bring my sister and her husband back to the church. We were kind of talking about polygamy. And my brother-in-law, who is extremely smart, Megan, I've never been to college. Okay. I'm a high school graduate who got his hands and still gets his hands dirty in construction, videography, whatever I can do to make a living. This guy's a smart guy. Okay. He's a business guy. He's a smart guy. But anyways, he says, we were arguing about polygamy and about specifically Joseph Smith. And I said, I think that was more Brigham Young is what I said at the time. And he said, I don't know about that. He said, you might want to check with your church about that. And that's all he said. And I'll be honest, that planted a seed, if you know what I mean. That planted a seed because I had never heard of Joseph's polygamy at that point. So, and let me also mention one other thing. When I was bishop, I was randomly selected among bishops to take a survey. Now I know that the church operates not by revelation, but largely by surveys.
Right.
So the church said, hey, Bishop Hinkley, you've been randomly selected to take this survey. I said, okay. And I kind of treated it almost like Google would do if you bought a blender. They were like, hey, tell us what you think about this blender, and you like, oh, it's great. It works. It does all. So I thought I could click through and be done with it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I was wrong. It was very in-depth, and it was a survey about the gospel topic essays, which I think at this time, I'm not exactly sure year-wise, but I think they would have been out a little while.
Yeah. So what year was this? Were you taking the survey?
Okay. I feel like the surveys came out. I don't know if they all came out together or if I feel like they might have added some over time. But I feel like this survey was more towards the end of my time as bishop versus the beginning. But it's hard.
2017-ish or so.
Yeah, I tried to do a search in my mail to see when I got that prompt to take the survey, but I couldn't find it. Anyways, I feel like it was a little bit more towards the end. At any rate, it was a survey about the gospel topic essays, and it said, you were selected among bishops. First question, have you seen the gospel topic essay on, race in the priesthood? And yes or no. And if you clicked no, I think it would basically, I don't remember what it would say if you click no, but if you click yes, it would say, okay, first of all, did you read it? What did you think about it? Will you give us feedback? Like they really were asking for more than just, yes, it's great, which is what I expected.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to seem like a dud of a bishop, like, oh, this guy does it. So, a few of the things I had to go and read real quick before I could respond. And I realized that it was really in depth. There were, to be quite honest, there were some of the questions that I didn't answer, and I sort of lied. I was like, oh, it's great. I really like the way specifically about polygamy and things, because I
Mm.
knew that that was one of the topics that had pulled away the two people I just mentioned, my
Yeah.
sister and Nathan, from my interview.
Yeah.
So, anyways, the church did reach out to me asking my opinion on some things that they, one, never told me about, my stake leadership never trained me about, and no one had ever mentioned to me. And I was learning about these things for the first time. So
Mm.
it definitely planted a seed.
Yeah.
So to fast forward a little bit, it didn't like I stayed strong during that part, got released after 5 years, went into the high council, went around to all the stakes in the or all the wards in the stake, as first as just a regular high council, then as the high counselor over young men, then as the high counselor over music. And I would take my guitar, which I'd usually have sitting there, but it's downstairs. I would take my guitar and I would play a song for people and talk about how I feel about it. And it was something that probably is not real common for like out west, but
Definitely not.
For in Tennessee to show up at Sacrament with a acoustic guitar, not like an
Yeah.
electric rocking out guitar, but a stringed instrument, which is what the piano is. It's a
Yeah.
stringed instrument. I
Yeah.
would show up with a stringed instrument. I would share a song and talk about it. So, anyways, that's the type of thing I did. Stayed faithful, but there was and during this time when the two families that I just mentioned left the church, I remember specifically talking with my wife and basically promising her and asking her to promise me that we would never look at the anti-Mormon literature that pulled these two awesome families away.
Mm.
Basically, we promised each other like we would stay faithful, we would stay like there was nothing that we wanted more than to stay faithful, to keep our family active, and that we would
Mm.
not look at the stuff that was pulling them away.
Yeah.
Well, I've thought about that a lot because ultimately, Megan, I guess I broke that promise
Mm.
because these things, these seeds were in my mind, and I remember having the perspective of the church should, and I expected could, stand on its own 2 feet. Like whatever the
Yeah.
problems that people have, I'm sure there's answers for. And so there was a time that I allowed myself the permission to look at those things. And I can't put into words why, because we had promised each other that we wouldn't. Um, I guess let me mention one other thing, and I don't want to mention this as a super powerful or influential player in the whole scheme of things, but it was a player, not a major thing. So one of the businesses that I have, I've already told you, I'm a self-employed guy. Whatever I
Yeah.
can do to
Yeah.
is videography. So I have a videography business for about 13 years now, 14 maybe, and I do a lot of weddings. So I'll do anywhere from 20, 30, even as much as 50 or 60 weddings with one of my brothers and I. We have a business together. And I attend these weddings and I see beautiful, like a moment of two families coming together, tears, father speeches that just really like inspire me. Like these are good people, first of all,
Yeah.
and I think about my own wedding or weddings of people that I know where certain family members aren't even invited or
Yeah.
aren't able to attend. That has always sort of, and matter of fact, when I was bishop, I wrote to my stake president and I said, President, I want to talk about something that I see as a problem. And I was simply pointing out this whole problem in the church of not being able to do civil ceremonies or ring ceremonies, which were greatly discouraged at the time.
Yeah.
Of course, now we know that they've changed their policy, which, that's a whole different story. But
Yeah.
I poured my heart out to him. I told him that how wrong we're getting it, how I see other religions getting it right. And I'll be honest, Megan, part of that I saw was related to even the word of wisdom. So
Mm.
the word of wisdom for me, not only was I never tempted to try alcohol, not only did I never try it, I was never tempted to try it. Like it was not even on the realm of possibilities for me. Like,
Mm.
you've got to be kidding me. Alcohol? But as I started this job, I was like, for the first 3 or 4 years, I was like almost disgusted with myself that many weddings turn into kind of a party by the end of them, especially in the South.
Yeah.
Well, I was disgusted with them and with myself for the first 3 or 4 years. For the next 3 or 4 years, I was kind of like, it does kind of allow people to loosen up a little bit and kind of enjoy themselves. So I almost was, I was fine with it. Well,
Now, why were you disgusted with yourself about that?
I was disgusted with myself because I felt like I was encouraging by being present and
Okay.
filming this event. I was
Mhm.
encouraging people to indulge in alcohol. So
So in other words, your participation was sort of giving tacit approval for whatever they were doing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'll be honest with you, at the time I had a couple gay weddings. And I was asking myself, am I okay with this?
Mm.
Like, am I being, at the time, am I being too supportive of this? And ultimately I was like, no, this is a job, and that's the way I treated it. So
Yeah.
for the middle years, I was kind of like okay with it, like whatever. And then for the last few years, I almost started being like, you know what? This is not a terrible thing. Like, these people aren't bad people. And I was almost hoping that there would be alcohol at the reception because people were loosening up, and I saw grandmas dancing with grandsons and having a great time. And now let me acknowledge that I understand that this thing can be taken too far, can cause problems, can cause
Right.
addictions, can cause death. I
Right.
acknowledge that.
Right.
But I also acknowledge that I saw many people who were just allowing themselves to be able to loosen up, enjoy the moment. And now, a bit about myself. I can stand in front of 100,000 people and sing a song, say a speech, give a talk. I don't care, personally. Now, my wife, on the other hand, is very reserved, very nervous. There was a time we were on a cruise, and we were just simply walking in front of some other people at a pool. And I said, "Hey, let's go right over here." She grabs me and she's like, "No, I can't walk that way." I'm like, "Why?" She's like, "There's people over there." She had a bathing suit on. She's gorgeous. She's gorgeous. But I was like, she has always been very nervous, very self-conscious about herself, about her body, which, I could share some pictures with you. I have them all right here on my computer. She's gorgeous, but she's not like that way. And I realized that with her, a drink or two at a party, or in the past 2 years, we've went off doing things that we've never done in our life. Go dancing or go to a concert. A drink or two for her is miraculous.
Mm.
And I will say, maybe there's a anxiety pill or drug or something she could take that would also do a similar effect. Maybe there is. But you know what? A drink or two also for her allows her to enjoy herself,
Mm.
sort of like I can do without it. Does
Right.
that make sense?
It makes total sense. It does. And I think that not enough people realize or understand that. I'm so glad you're saying this because, okay, yes, alcohol is a level 3 carcinogen. None of us should be drinking it. And as you mentioned, it does lead to problems, addictions, death in some cases. and it can be really problematic. But I'm so glad you're saying this part of it, because things like alcohol, or maybe THC, or maybe Xanax, or maybe some other type of prescribed drug, right, allows people to actually enjoy a circumstance where they would otherwise be incredibly uncomfortable. And I think there's so much stigma, even behind prescribed drugs that have this same effect, that people get really sort of judgy about, like, oh, you need that to have a good
Right.
time. It's like, well, no, I don't need it, but it makes the time, instead of, 10% enjoyable, it makes it 100% enjoyable. And why would you not want that for someone? If they can
Right.
consume responsibly, if they can, go from, instead of being completely anxious the entire time, to actually enjoying it, like, that's a beautiful thing to me,
Yeah.
you know?
And that's what I started to realize. And I started to feel like I have been selfish with my wife, because just because I didn't need something, there were many, like, to give a talk or something for her. No, she's not going to do that. She's just
Yeah.
way too. So, I'll admit, like, you just mentioned kind of being judgy. I was very much that way. So that was one of the things that I realized. And I remember telling my wife, you know, I feel like we might be missing out on some things that life has to offer. And she's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? So anyways, and I'll be honest, Megan, my wife, when she was 16 or whatever, 15, 16, she got in trouble a little for trying, a drink of alcohol here or there. I broke up with her. I broke up and I said, you've got to be kidding me.
Mm.
Why would you do that? And we broke up. And then we got back together shortly after. I mean, for me, I greatly looked down on this. It was never a thought, a temptation, nothing.
Yeah.
So anyways, I felt like I was being unjust with her, and demanding. I just did an interview the other day, a couple days ago, with a friend of mine who is a current bishop. And I said, Bishop, let me ask you a question. Would you deny a recommend to a couple that comes in and says, listen, every now and then my wife and I have a drink together, and I feel like we loosen up, we have a better evening, maybe our sex life is even better that particular night. Like, would you have a problem with that? And he basically said, well, I might need to know a few more, a little bit more information, but honestly, no, I wouldn't, and I've kind of seen that now that's not the way I was when
Yeah.
I was very black and white as a bishop.
Yeah.
I was very black and white. I say that, let me give myself a little bit of credit. I never held a disciplinary court, as we called
Mhm.
it in the time, on
Yeah.
anyone. And I never told anyone to not partake of the sacrament.
Mm.
And so I give myself credit for those two things. Someone would come in, Bishop, I've got a problem with masturbation or pornography. We would talk about it, and I would say, you know what I want you to do? I want you to take the sacrament.
Mm.
Because at the time I thought, well, that will help you, right? So I give myself a little bit of credit on stuff like that. But for the most part, I was very black and white. Right or wrong, the prophet said it, that's what goes. I didn't have a lot of nuance in me, as this friend that I just told you about, as he has. He has a
Yeah.
lot of nuance. So anyways, I pretty much took you through growing up, did all the things, mission, bishop, having kids, everything's great, and then giving myself permission to start to look and expecting that the church could stand on its own 2 feet, and being devastated to find out that it couldn't. And I've shared this picture a few times in a few different places, and I think I probably should share it right now. But there was a time I'm so I'm so almost embarrassed of this picture, Megan. But there was a time when my daughter, who was the perfect daughter, did everything right, seminary, all the stuff. She's our oldest our oldest child. She did all the things. She had a fiance who she was engaged to, she was to be married in like 6 weeks, and they were planning a temple marriage. Now, our temple was in this time was closed for renovation, so they were going to put it off a short time. They were going to
Mhm.
get married, but the church had changed their policy that you could get sealed after a civil
Civil,
wedding.
yeah.
Yeah. So my daughter was just weeks away, a couple months away from getting married and subsequently sealed. And I started to see, and this is the phrase that I repeated 1,000 times over in my mind and in communications with my wife. And let me just say that my wife and I, through all of this, we have been on the exact same page. And I acknowledge that that is not the case for a lot of people. And I am heartbroken over that fact, that some people are dealing with this alone. But, anyways, the phrase that I told myself and my wife over and over is, oh my gosh, the church is not what I thought it was. And just coming to that conclusion. Now, of course, now I have a podcast and I've been talking for months about what I meant by that. But, in short, what did I mean? I meant that I thought that it was the only true church on the face of the earth. That, that it was the only place to find the truth and the actual priesthood, the authority of God, and that our prophets literally spoke to God and then told us, what he wanted to, like, I was fully believing all of those things that anyone that knows anything about Mormonism knows. I've put my reputation on the line growing up. I've stood up and stood out and preached on my mission, and now I'm like, it's not. It is not those things. What is it? We can have a debate about what it is, but it's not what I thought it was. And so there's a video on my channel that is called "Why I Left," and I think it's got about 13,000 views at this point. And it's not a complete, explanation, but I hit on a few of the high points. And to be perfectly honest, I personally have not left. My name is still on the records. However, my wife did remove her name, and many of my children removed their names. So, in a sense, I actually haven't left. However, for the past 2 years, I've not attended. So, for me, I've left. There's never been a time in my life where I didn't attend church. Even if we were on vacation, we went to the local ward. Matter of fact, I believe that I attended Bill Rill's ward in Ohio when we were visiting some family. So
Oh, wow, that's pretty
he
cool.
he and I have spoken briefly about that. But anyways, so yeah, I haven't attended in 2 years. So in a sense, yes, I have left. But so I determined the church was not what I thought it was. The major factors were obviously the polygamy stuff. For my wife, that was a huge, a huge. One reason it was so hard for her to find out about Joseph's polygamy was she actually came across the information with Fanny Alger a long time ago.
Mm.
Either I was on my mission or even maybe before that. And she went to some of her leaders at the time, and I don't remember exactly how she came across it. In this time, there was no internet, or it was very new. But she came across it, and she went to her leaders. She's like, oh my gosh, what is this? And she was assured that this was anti-Mormon lies. There was nothing to it.
Now,
And
so for my viewers who've never been Mormon, can you give just a brief rundown on who Fanny Alger is?
okay. So Fanny Alger was basically a either like a maid or like a hired hand, or in this time they had farms and things. So I don't know exactly what her duties were, but she lived in the house, in Joseph's house, and helped. And when you get into the details of the timeline of when she would have been in the house, it would have corresponded to before Joseph claimed to have been told or received information. And matter of fact, Joseph claims that an angel appeared with a drawn sword and demanded that he begin polygamy, which, has an angel ever is that the method God chooses, with his children, to send an angel to demand things? Did we see that with Hitler, or with anything in our past? Does God? No, God does not do that. However, for some reason in this particular church and situation, this was the only time God has demanded and forced something, essentially. So anyways, Fanny Alger, what was it? I think a lot of people, even faithful people, will admit that it was probably more like an affair.
It was a dirty, nasty, filthy
Scrape.
scrape.
Yes. And so, there's testimony that they were caught in the barn. There's testimony that Emma kicked Fanny out after this. Let's see. She's not the
And when
one
we
that.
say testimony, we're talking about written journal entries of people who were actually there, what I would call a primary source document, where it's in the person was there, and it's in their own handwriting, in their own journal, and
Yeah.
this is their description of the events.
Right.
And so what we have is someone who is a servant in Joseph Smith's house, living in the house. They were caught in the barn together in a compromising situation, and firsthand accounts were given that it was basically an affair between the two of these people. And Fanny was at the time 17, I want to say,
Yeah.
and Joseph was 27-ish,
Right.
something like that. And this was prior to the revelation of Doctrine and Covenants section 132, where Joseph Smith claims that an angel with a drawn sword appeared to him and told him that he must practice polygamy.
Right. So my wife came across some of this stuff early on and was assured that it was anti-Mormon lies, no need to worry.
Yeah.
And so she put it away. Well, her and I were sitting in the hot tub one day, and I said, honey, I want to tell you about something. And I start to tell her this story, and I see it on her face. It just goes like blank. She's like, I already know this story. This is what I struggled with years ago. And I said, well, I'm sorry to say that it's now on the church website, and it's apparently true. And so this brings us to those gospel topic essays that I was talking about, that the church now, to their credit, has owned up to some things. They've owned up to some things regarding Joseph and his polygamy, which was never talked about. I were always led to believe that this was more of a Brigham thing, which, why did that even make it better? I don't know, but it sort of did for a lot of us.
Yeah.
They owned up to Joseph's polygamy. They owned up to Brigham's racism. Basically, the church says that, in short, that Brigham was a racist, or that he gave in to the racist teachings of the day.
Right.
And so so the way that I've put it recently was, the church now in their essays admits that Joseph was a liar and Brigham was a racist. And what I mean by liar is there's many times where Joseph was preaching even a month before his martyrdom You know, what people say that I have, 7 wives when I can only find one, or whatever that quote is.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, everyone's saying that I have, I'm doing this, I can only find one. And he's essentially denying that, that he, and now we know that many of the people, even in that were listening to that sermon, were actually married to him.
His plural wives were in the congregation, in the meeting, when he's up on the pulpit saying, oh, it's crazy that people say I have multiple wives. I can only keep one happy. And how must those women have felt, the ones who
Right.
were his plural wives? And can you imagine how devastating that would be? I mean, because they knew their relationship was secret. I think Joseph probably told them, you have to keep this private. You can't tell anyone that we've been sealed together.
Right.
And this is the reason why whenever apologists say, oh, but he never had sex with any of his plural wives, or he never consummated the sealings or the marriages, especially with the younger kids. My contention, though, is that especially in the case of Fanny Alger, in the case of who's the one who broke my shelf?
Oh, it's probably
The youngest one.
what's his name's daughter. I'll think of it in just a second.
Yeah, I mean, we'll think of it after we
Yeah.
wrap it up. It's so frustrating because I talk about this all the time, and then to not be able to remember her name, it's so important to say her name.
Yeah.
But reading her diary and how conflicted she was about the prophet coming to her and saying, your family's salvation is guaranteed. Putting myself into that position as a 14-year-old kid, with as devout as I was at that time, wanting so badly to do everything right. If a church leader had come to me and said, Megan, you can guarantee your salvation and the salvation of everyone that you love and care about if you will have an extramarital relationship with this 27, 28-year-old prophet or whatever, I would have done it.
Was that Helen Mar Kimball? Yeah.
Thank you. Helen Mar Kimball.
Yeah.
So, reading what she wrote in her diary about the conflict in her heart about that situation just gutted me.
Yeah.
And thinking about how she had to stay home from dances when the rest of her friends were out socializing, and she was at home probably crying herself to sleep. And so to me, it matters. But even if somebody could definitively prove to me that Joseph Smith never had sex with any of those teenage girls, he still took their lives. He took their lives. He took their ability to have a normal life, to have normal relationships, to sit in a congregation and have the person who took your life up at the podium saying, no, but I actually didn't. I cannot imagine how devastated I would feel. I would want to die, honestly.
Yeah. I agree. And as far as the question about whether or not sex was involved, I will just say that the church, in my view, has acknowledged that there was, simply by the wording of their little cartoon that they put out.
Yeah.
Now, consequently, right before you and I started this interview, I read online that they have now changed that. I don't know. I haven't had time to look into what's been changed. But the wording that they had on there was, they talked about how, now I know this word is going to set off some bells for some people, but how hard it was for Joseph to practice this polygamy.
Yeah.
Well, why was it hard? So it was hard, Megan, because if it was only like in name, or in the eternities or something, it wouldn't be hard, right? He was sealed to even men, we're told. So that's not hard to just be sealed in some spiritual or some heavenly method. It would be hard if, as you pointed out, you are expected to not do some things that a normal younger child or young adult should be able to do, like go to dances. And it would be hard because you know that you are having these interactions with sexual interactions as a married couple. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
So
just the,
I'll go too, because I saw this too right before we went
yeah,
on.
yeah.
This is breaking news. It's Wednesday, February 19th. It's 12 o'clock Central Time. And 1 hour ago, Mormon Discussion Incorporated posted, take a moment today and notice what changed. Every unhealthy part that was criticized has been removed with the exception of plural marriage itself. This is a cartoon
Yeah.
that the church, the LDS church, put out to teach children about the concept of polygamy. And I felt like, I wanted to comment on it, but it was being done on so many different spaces and done so well that I didn't. But now I regret not doing it, because it's sick. I feel like it's grooming. Mormon Stories is doing an episode in a couple of hours on this. This is so important, and it's what you've been talking about all along with the gospel topics essays, where your wife literally believed those were anti-Mormon lies,
Right.
and now the church has published them on their website in the form of the gospel topic essays, and now, so what was anti-Mormon lies, they're now confirming as true. And to
Yes.
me, if I hadn't already been out at that point, this would have done it for me, because they literally lied to us. They told us, oh, this is not true. And now they're saying that it is true. I don't know how more clear you could get than this. And I'm a little sad, because the time that the gospel topic essays came out was a real foggy time for me. I separated from my husband of 22 years in February of 2017. And I think it was at that time when I had to back away from all my callings. I told my bishop, I was like, look, I'm drowning over here. Can you please just give me something easy to do? At the time I was teaching gospel doctrine, and I was also, a ministering sister, or whatever they call now. I was the ward music chairman, which I had been for 10 years. I was like, please, can you release me? Anybody can do that job. Doesn't have to be a musician. So they put me as ward organist. And even that, I told the bishop, I was like, I could wake up on a Sunday morning and be in a black hole and not be able to get out of bed. So you're going to have a backup,
Yeah.
So then I went down to once a month. And I think this is about the time the gospel topic essays came out, because I didn't know about them until after I resigned my membership 2 years ago.
Right.
So I feel like, and I don't know, so maybe you can speak to this more. I feel like they sort of snuck those things onto the website, never told anyone about them until you took your survey. It seems like there was never an announcement.
Yeah.
And this is the other thing that bothers me. They didn't publish the essays and say, we're sorry that we dismissed these stories as anti-Mormon lies in the
Right.
past. Now we've found evidence that they're actually true, and we want to be transparent. They didn't do that.
Mm-mm.
It's sort of like when someone apologizes and they say, well, I'm sorry I did that, but the reason I did is because you made me so angry. If you hadn't made
Right.
me angry, I never would have yelled at you, right? So I
Yeah.
feel like the church is saying, like, we're going to just quietly put this here and hope nobody notices. And then when they do, we're going to gaslight them and say, well, this has been true all along.
Yeah. You are so right, Megan. Let me put it into one sentence. The anti-Mormon literature from the 90s is now found on the church website. If I were to put it in one sentence, I would say that the anti-Mormon literature from the 90s is now found as true on the church website. And you are absolutely correct that they slipped this in overnight at some point. At some point, they asked me, but they didn't ask all bishops. This was a random. I was randomly selected. So many bishops. I was never given any. Hey, heads up! We have this out there. Nothing. Not only that, I never had any member. Hey, bishop, what the heck is this I just read? Nothing. And let me just say that when I finally, and I'm getting there in my story, when I became vocal online about the issues, there is a sister in our stake, and I will not name her, but anyone in my stake knows exactly who I'm talking about. She is very vocal. She is very abrasive. She's very you either love her or hate her because she's a strong personality and wife of a leadership position in our stake. Okay. When I started coming out with some information on my Facebook page, she contacts me in a Facebook message, and her and I used to be great friends. And she says, "Where are these gospel topic essays you keep talking about?" Now, this lady is the lady that would teach gospel doctrine. When I attended their ward, when I would visit around on the High Council, I would sit there and listen. She knows everything. She's a know-it-all. She's very seasoned. She's very, matter of fact, I watched her rebuke this guy in her gospel doctrine class for speaking out of line. She's like, "How dare you?" And I'm like, "Heck yeah, you go, girl." I mean, a very strong personality where she's like, "Where are these gospel topic essays?" She couldn't even find them as a very seasoned. And so I responded to her, "Listen, sister," I won't say her name. "Listen, that's my point. My point is that even you in our stake, and there's no woman that would say, 'Well, I know more than her.' There's none. She would say, 'Oh, I know more than everyone in this.' She did not know where they are. And I explained to her, I will walk you through how you get to them. But let me point out, and I'm telling her in our messages, let me point out that the fact that I have to walk you through this is an illustration of the problem."
Yeah.
Now, they're not hard to find. And matter of fact, now you can just Google gospel topic
Right.
essays and it'll come up. But
Right.
people don't understand this part, Megan. And it's so hard to explain. I just now said that people can find it if you Google gospel topic essays. We didn't do that. We were fucking told not to do that.
Yes.
Not to Google things
Right.
that we should not Google.
Right.
And I never did that. I didn't do it. I was trained not to look at unapproved sources. And
Right.
so I never did it.
Right. We were told if you want to know something about the church, you go to LDS.org, you search their database, you search our archives. Even I never even would have gone to BYU's website to look at things. I went to general conference talks. I went to the scriptures. I went to LDS.org only to find which manual did I read that in, kind of thing. And I would, when I was teaching gospel doctrine or Relief Society, I would go to the footnotes and I'd read the whole lesson, and then I'd read all the reference material that was in the lesson. And if it told me to read only verses 17 through 21 of section 132, I would read the entire 132. But I read it with that faithful perspective of like, Joseph Smith was a prophet. The church is true. If I come across something that doesn't align with that, I'm going to set it aside because I just don't know yet.
Right.
And so I was very much like you as well. Even as a gospel doctrine teacher, I would stand up on those Sundays where we were going to talk about something controversial that could go into left field, like the end of times, anything having to do with near-death experiences, anything having to do with. I had a guy in my gospel doctrine class one time raise his hand and say that he could credibly tell us the actual location of Kolob. And I was like, "Shut up, sit down." I never said those words, but I was like, "Brother, we're not going to entertain that during this particular lesson, but let's you and I talk afterwards."
Tell him to reach out to me. I want to have him on my podcast.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's like 100% in. So I don't know. It's possible. But I, like you, I was the same exact way. I refused to look at anything that I was not supposed to look at because I was told not to. And also because there's so much. if you're only looking at faithful sources and Deseret book and the teachings of previous prophets, those were the things I was spending my time on. And I spent a lot of time on it. I took my calling as a gospel doctrine teacher very seriously, because I didn't ever want to be in a class where someone raised their hand and had a question I couldn't answer for them.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to be there with the answers so that they wouldn't go looking in other places, you know?
Right.
And so I, like you, was devastated when I read these gospel topic essays. I was devastated when I saw President Nelson demonstrate the rock in the hat. I had never heard that as being real or true before.
Yeah.
I was devastated when, even in the gospel topic essays, if you want to really know what happened with polygamy, you have to click through all the footnotes before you finally get to the 14-year-old girl.
Right.
So they're still hiding, they're still denying, they're still not being transparent. They still haven't apologized, and they never will.
Right. So let me back up just a little bit. A second ago, I showed you that picture of me in the hospital.
Yeah.
I realized that I never really got to what was going on. So what was going on is I was playing in my mind all of these spiritual experiences that I had. Well, what about this? You know, what about this time when you were as bishop and you felt this? What about this time when, you know, on a youth conference you felt this? What about this time on your mission? But then I would go to the other side and I'm like, yeah, but that's just elevated emotion and that's just this. And, you know, there's no way that that could have been true. And it's just the way that I was indoctrinated. You know, I was having this mental breakdown. Now, Megan, let me be very blunt. I'm a construction worker. I am a whitewater kayaker, you know, class 4, class 5 rapids. I could show you some pictures here, but I'm a outdoors guy. Matter of fact, I don't even have a doctor. And so I've never been to the doctor. I've never had stress or anxiety. Matter of fact, when I was in the church a few years ago, I would have probably said that those things are just made up and they don't exist. Like, I was a very pull your freaking bootstraps up and just get to work and get it done. That's the kind of guy I was. And so I had a absolute mental breakdown. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I was constantly going through, well, what about this? Well, what about this in my mind? And I could talk about this for a long time, and I've done some podcasts about it, but I was losing my mind. To put it just as clear as I can, I was losing my mind, and I was having what now I recognize as either a mental breakdown or a what's the word? Something stress.
Panic attack.
Panic attack. Yes, thank you. You know, something like that. I felt like I was about to die. And matter of fact, I went out one night during this and just started cleaning out my truck because I was like, I don't want to leave my wife a dirty truck to have to deal with. I mean, I was losing it. I was absolutely losing it. And finally I was like, listen, honey, you're going to have to take me to the hospital. And I actually went twice. The second time I didn't go in, I paced out front. But the first time I went in, the doctor did a bunch of tests. He assumed that I had overdosed on something. Well, here's the thing. I had never even tried anything, even alcohol or anything. So he does all these tests and he comes back and he says, Mr. Hinkley, you're clean. And I said, I know I'm clean. What do you mean I'm clean? I know I'm clean. I said, I'm freaking out. And I didn't, he's not a member. He would not have understood. He gave me some drug. I have no idea what it was. It was a pill. He told my wife, give him this. He'll be fine. So she did. We go home. I go to sleep and it's fine. That did happen another time. I didn't go in because, I don't know why I didn't go in, but luckily, I probably couldn't afford to go in because I got the bill from the first trip. But finally, I accepted. I accepted the fact that the church wasn't what I thought it was. So I was at work one day. My wife was with me, and I said, Kaylee, my daughter, I said, I want you to come by. I have something to tell you. So she comes by. She's with her fiance, who was a member of only about a year. I sat through all the discussions. Matter of fact, I taught the discussions. The missionaries would come over and they'd say, let's just let Bishop Hinkley teach this. He knows all this. And I would rattle it all off. And I'll say again, my daughter is brilliant. She is a brilliant mind. She's never made even a B in her life. She's an English major. And I'm going to be even more frank with you right now. I even politically at the time was very much in one direction, which now I'm not. But I was very much on the right. My daughter, who was growing up in a time where, especially social media and things, she was much more in the center or on the left on some things. And I was starting to see that she was gaining a voice of her own, and she was speaking out. And we had some times of contention in our house at this time. Let me just say, Megan, that if there's anything I know of 100% surety, it's this. Had I not went through a deconstruction when I did, I know that my daughter would have. She was on the path of finding her voice and speaking out against the injustice that she observed. I know for a fact that the way that I was as a true believing member, that I would have treated her in a lot of ways like I did my sister, and that I'm ashamed to say it, almost ready to just wash my hands of her. And so if God exists, I thank the Lord, I thank God, I thank whoever that I was able to deconstruct before her, because I'm ashamed to say that I would have basically cut her out. That's the way I was so far in and so far indoctrinated that I would have put church and those things before even my own family. I recognize that now. But anyways, so I called her over. I said, Kaylee, I want to talk to you about something. And so we call her over. She comes over. I said, let's go sit in the truck. So we go out to my truck. I'm in the driver's seat. My wife's the passenger seat. My daughter and her fiance are in the back. I start bawling. I'm crying. I couldn't speak for more than 10 minutes. And she's like, what is it, Dad? What's going on? And finally she's like, are you and Mom getting a divorce? And I'm like, no, me and your mom are not getting a divorce. And finally I say, Kaylee, it's about church. And she's like, well, what? I said, there's some problems. And I said, the church is not what we thought it was. And she starts crying. And her first thing that she says when she composes herself is she says, I just know that in the last days that even the elect are going to be deceived. And I'm afraid that's what's happening right now. And so I said, let me explain myself. And so I walked through some things, and I've tried to address many of these things on my own podcast. And after, 15 or 20 minutes, she said, oh, so he just made it all up. And in a relatively short amount of time, and I don't want to minimize her pain, and her deconstruction, because I think that I have done that in the past. Matter of fact, at one time she called me on it. She's like, "Dad," she's like, "You made it sound like I was ready to just jump ship immediately." She's like, "No." She went through her own grieving process, but I'll be honest, I was so far in my own that I was not able to really acknowledge her and her pain.
Mm,
And I acknowledge that now. And
yeah.
there'll come a day. She's got some poems and stuff that absolutely tear me apart. And
Mm,
if anyone wants to hear, I read one of them on one of my videos. It's called Inheritance. I was talking about something totally separate, but it's called Inheritance. And I was talking about how the church gets involved in this whole thing. It's kind of an interesting thing. But at the end, I read one of her poems, and the poem was basically about how. So there's you remember the church videos that the church used to put out, like the Mormon messages? There was one about the gardener and how he cuts down his plant to be in his own, what he wants it to be.
right.
Well, she wrote a poem about how it should have been. And it should have been that the gardener loves this plant because it is blossoming and becoming who it is, instead of what the gardener wants it to be. And
Mhm.
it's a beautiful poem. And I read it, and it's something my wife
Mm,
and it's so beautiful. And it's basically, she's pointing out how we don't need to become what someone else wants us to be. We need to become our authentic selves, and people need to find joy and happiness and the beauty in that. And
yeah.
as I was reading that, I'm just in tears about it. She's very talented. She's an English major and
Yeah.
just very good with words. So, anyways, I
I
s-
would love for you to share that poem with me at some point, because it resonates so deeply with what I feel about not only the church but about parenting in general as well. I
yeah,
think there are so many of us parents, especially when we first start out, that we think it's our job to mold this child, right?
yes,
And in my young parenting life, I very much felt that way. It wasn't until I had a child that was difficult for me that I was like, oh, they are their own person.
right,
They came with this personality that is different than anything I've experienced before. And they have every right to have the life that they want,
yeah,
and to make their life whatever it is that they want. And I remember the I don't remember the video that you're talking about, but I remember the talk that it was based on. It was Hugh B. Brown,
the current
the
bush,
current bush,
yes,
exactly.
yes,
Yes, and so the bush gets cut down and is devastated because it was just starting to grow and blossom and bloom, and the gardener comes and says, "Don't you think I know better what
yes,
what you could become, or what you should be, or where your place is in the garden?" And I think that's what got me too, because it was like, okay, I could stay in this little box of Mormonism and try to be acceptable to my parents, to the church, to my church leaders, whatever, to God, really. Or I could be who I am. I could embrace all the parts of myself that are not acceptable in Mormonism. And I could be my true authentic self. And which am I going to choose,
right.
And that was sort of the time when, I don't know, you mentioned something earlier before that made me think about this, that there can't possibly just be one path to God, because we as individual human beings are so different. We all have just such a different perspective and different experiences. And why is it that God expects us to all be the same if he created us all differently? Why is it that there's only one path and only one way to be acceptable to God, only one way to be spiritual? That doesn't make room for the fact that we've all had these different experiences and perspectives. And I would think that God, who created this diversity, would want to honor that by saying, for you, maybe your path looks a little differently than the other person. There's
Yes.
all of these cognitive dissonant ideas swimming around in my brain the whole time that I was Mormon. And I was like you. I looked at all those spiritual experiences and I was like, how can I deny that? That was the Holy Ghost speaking to me. It took me a long time before I
Yeah.
was able to talk about that. So sorry to interrupt you.
No, no, no. You're perfectly fine. You gave me a second to actually find that poem from her.
Oh, yay.
Now, I also read this on the video, and it's on my channel called it's called Inheritance, I think. And so you can check it out. But would you like for me to share this for a
Yes,
second?
please. Yes,
It's
please.
it's it's pretty short. It's called The Mighty Currant Bush, and this is by my daughter Kaylee Jean Daniels. And I'll try to get through this. This is what she envisions how this story should have been. She says, I found myself in a garden, blooming exactly where I was planted. As small as a mustard seed, I began, and then something greater branching up and up toward the heavens. I bore no berries, no blossoms. My purpose was different, but just as great as those fruit-filled, flowering trees soaking in all the sun around me. The day the gardener came, I stretched myself tall and wide, proud of what I had achieved and all that I had become. In the time he left me alone to grow, but his sad eyes looked upon me, and he sighed, and he set to cutting me down, till I was nothing but a stump. I was too tall, he grumbled, too bold. My leaves cast shadows upon his other creations, those that better fit his mold. I did not conform to his grand design, so he cut me down. My aims were too loud for the quiet purpose he had planned, so he destroyed me. But that was years ago, and his garden is in ruin now, and I'm growing unchained, free of those rigid rules and expectations. I'm making such wonderful progress amid the chaos, and I patiently await the day that I'll see my gardener again, and he'll accept me as I am, not as his sharp shears force me to be. He'll look at me towering above him with a smile on his face, and he'll say, You, my mighty currant bush, are perfect just as you are. What a glorious day that will be.
That's gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
So, that's the type of daughter we raised. And
Beautiful.
she is glorious. She has her own thoughts, her own opinions. She stepped away from the church very considerably early compared to my wife or myself, who is still on the rolls. Why am I on the rolls? I'm on the rolls because I wanted to speak out as a member.
Mm,
I've given my life to this church. I've given my money, my time, all that I have. And I felt like I at least deserved to speak out as a member.
yeah.
Now, to finish the story, I started speaking out on Facebook, and I started writing. And I never considered myself a writer. My dad was a songwriter. My brother was a songwriter. I was always just I did other things, but I was never a writer. And I found a voice. I found you talked about little things in our life that we do that make a change. Or how did you vocalize that?
Small changes that end up being revolutionary.
Yes. So for me, early on in my deconstruction, one small change was I began to love to write and to sit in my thoughts for a minute and give myself permission to just say, forget what the brethren say about any topic. What do you think about it?
Mm.
I gave myself permission to look inside myself, to think introspectively, and to say, what do I feel about this,
Mm.
regardless of what has been said. And so I started taking each topic, from heaven to priesthood blessings, to alcohol, as I talked about earlier, to, all aspects of either the church, the gospel, or just life in general. And I started to write about them, and I started to see people commenting and reposting and sharing. Oh my gosh, I loved what this guy said. And I was like, wow, this is different. I've never considered myself a writer. I have writers in my family, a daughter who's a writer, and so even though my punctuation, it might not have been quite correct, and my daughter has called me many times on that, I found that I could not worry about that as much. Like, I'm going to put my feelings out there, and it resonated with people.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started my speaking out. Well, my stake president said, Brother Hinkley, I'd like to talk to you about your Facebook posts. And I said, okay, I'll come in and talk to you under one condition. I want you to read the posts. I said, have you read them? He says, well, some of them. I said, okay, well, I'm going to send you all of them. I send him all of them in an email file. I said, I want you to read them. And if you read them, I'll come in and talk to you. And I did. And I made a post on the Mormon Stories community page. And I said, it was a picture of me. And I said, I'm on my way to talk to the stake president about my Facebook posts. Can I share this?
Yeah,
Quick?
absolutely.
So I said I was on my way to. This isn't my Facebook post, but this is immediately after I made that post. John reached out and said, "Hey, Brother Hinkley, or hey Nathan, would you like to come on Mormon Stories?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, sure, yeah, I'll come on Mormon Stories. Why not?" And so that happened just a couple hours after, and I shared my experience. Well, what was my experience? I'll go ahead and take that off. What was my experience? My experience was I was treated amazingly. Like, this stake president, it has changed now. His time was up.
Yeah.
He was golden. I mean, I'll just say it. Golden. Just a gem of a guy. I'm talking about, this guy has 4 adopted children with special needs. He is a great guy.
Yeah.
And we talked, and at the end of our meeting, this is what he said. And I've talked about this a lot on my podcast. He said, Brother Hinkley, it's my opinion that you are a better person and you are in a better place now than you were as an active member. So I can't shame you or change you or ask you to change. He didn't say stop posting. He didn't say you misspoke here or you were wrong here. And what he meant by that, in my opinion, Megan, is I was very black and white with very little nuance before. It was either right or wrong. The prophet said it, and so it is. That's how I was. And he isn't. And he recognized that where I am now is in a lot more nuanced place. Now, when I say now, that was 2 years ago. And I would say now I'm in an even more nuanced place. But at the time, I was in a place where I was allowing people to be themselves, not being rigid in following what I thought we were supposed to do, which was follow the prophet, right?
Yeah.
So he recognized that I was in a better place. And so I went back on the Mormon Stories, community page, and I was like, hey, it was actually great. And so John wanted to talk about it, and that's what we did. That episode has been viewed 150,000 times, I think, now. And however, my parents have never said, hey, by the way, good job on that. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
My best friend, who was the guy that I just told you about, was a current bishop in Florida.
Hmm.
He was the one that reached out to me and said, "Hey, good job. You should post that," because I wasn't even going to post it on my own page
Yeah.
because I was, I didn't want to offend people. He says,
Right.
"You should post that." He says, "You sounded more real, more authentic, more less mean and less mad." He says, "Sometimes your writings might come across a little mean or mad." He says, you came across better." He said, "You should post it." So I said, "Okay, I'll post it." And so, he was actually the one that encouraged me early on to post that. Of course, I got a lot of support. So my writings ended up, basically, I have a file of about 100, I don't know how many, 50 or 100 different, just short little Facebook posts that now I am turning into podcast episodes, essentially is what's going on. So there's
Yeah.
that. There is interviews that I've been able to do. I don't know if, would it be okay if I just shared this quick little thing that I shared on Facebook?
Of course.
This is an example of the type of things that I would write. You can see that it's not really abrasive. It's not like attacking the church. I see some people that I follow who they come out with their guns blazing, and more power to them. They're showing the temple clothes and temple, just things that I support them in that, but I also recognize that it's going to be very met with some met with people. The people who are faithful are going to either shut down or they're going to unfollow or whatever.
Right.
And people have done that to me as well. But
Right.
this is the type of thing that I would write. So this what I called 8 verses 45. And it says, "In my church, an 8-year-old who still believes in Santa, wets the bed, and probably can't say his R's, can make an eternal covenant that will be binding and beneficial, not for a few years or 100 years, but for all time and eternity. There is no objection to this eternal ordinance, but rather it is expected that this will happen during his 8th year. If it does not happen while 8, the family is punished by making the child go through the missionary lessons as a typical investigator would. The 8-year-old is fully capable of making this decision. On the other hand, a 45-year-old man who has spent a year or two in deep study, cross-referencing, searching, verifying, and weighing the evidence, is misled, misguided, or deceived if he comes to a different conclusion regarding the truth claims of the church. The 8-year-old will likely share his testimony soon after his baptism in church while repeating the words his parents whispers in his ears, 'I know the church is true.' The 45-year-old would likely be asked to sit down or escorted out if he shares what he believes to be true, so he starts a Facebook page instead."
I love it.
So, just kind of just pointing out things that I see as this is kind of a problem in
Yeah.
my church.
Yeah.
And some people call me out. They're like, "Why do you keep saying my church?" Megan, it is, like I don't go anymore. But if I wanted to go to church, honestly, I'd probably go to the Mormon church.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where my family is. That's where my friends are. That's where, some great people are. I don't have a problem with going to another church or something, and I have attended some others, but, where would I go if I wanted to go to church? I'd probably go to my church, but I don't want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, my Facebook post led to my Mormon Stories interview, which led eventually to my podcast, which I initially called The Mormon Moron. So why did I call it that? For a play on words, obviously. Also, I wanted to try to keep it lighthearted and just kind of talk about sort of like what I just read, just kind of the lighthearted things. But the reason I started to not like the name Mormon moron when I started inviting guests to come on my podcast. Hey, and it's like, oh, I'm going on a podcast tonight. Well, who you talking to? I'm talking to the Mormon moron. It just felt weird. And one of my viewers had said, you should name your podcast an interview with the bishop. And I was like, I kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I changed it to the bishop's interview. Now, I have had some pushback. People that would say, I can't believe you're trying to capitalize on the calling of a bishop or whatever. And to that, I would just say, how many times have we been told, once a bishop, always a bishop,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I even remember a couple Sundays after I was released, walking down the hall, and the current bishop was right beside me, but we weren't walking together. And I was the previous bishop, and people walking up and saying, hey, bishop, and it's like, if I was good enough to still be called bishop then I
Yeah.
guess I'm still bishop now. And no, I'm not trying to capitalize on that. No, I don't go around considering myself, but it was something that I dedicated, 5 years of my life to. I did it with all my heart. I feel like during the time that I was, appreciated, liked, loved, whatever you want to call it, I didn't make a lot of enemies. I did the best I could. I was the same guy that I'm right now with you. I was animated and singing songs and palling around with the youth. I mean, that's the kind of guy I was. And so I made a lot of friends. And so, I do call my podcast now The Bishop's Interview. And what kind of podcast is it? I like to talk about some of my topics, like I just discussed, that I've written about. I like to do interviews with people, like you're doing with me right now. I've had some really cool people on. What I'd probably like to do maybe the most, and my wife says, I love it when you do that. And it's kind of, I learned that you could go live, and I realize that right now we're being, we're pre-recorded, and that's fine. But I realized that I could go live and interact in the comments with people, and I've had 100 or even 200 at one time because I had Colby Reddish on.
Mm-hmm.
He brought a big following, but just interacting with people. I'm a people guy. I think that's why I love being bishop. I love being on the high council, being with people. I need that,
Yeah.
Now, I've never had any professional counseling of like a therapist or anything like that. Years ago, I would have said that's made up, or that's, there's nothing to that. Of course, I was greatly mistaken at the time. But I have never had any professional. But I feel like through doing this with you and I, and doing these episodes where I have just sat just like this and talked to the camera, and that's how it was with that one episode, Inheritance, and that's how it's been with a few episodes where I just had a topic and I just hit go live, and I said, this is me. This is me being authentic. This is me being vulnerable, and just engaging, and then responding to comments, and not having a ton of pre-planned, stuff. So I've done that a lot on my channel, and I've enjoyed that. And I felt like, similar to me writing, I felt like me vocalizing my thoughts has been very therapeutic. So going back to your question, what's some little things, that has kind of revolutionized your life? One would be giving myself space to think for myself, not depending on what the brethren have said, write about it, share about it, and talk about it.
Yeah.
All of those things have worked wonders in my life. And I can't thank you enough for bringing me on to talk to you and your viewers about the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the authenticity of it. I love the idea that, it's just, here's a topic and let's talk about, our feelings about it. I found the same thing. I really love interacting with my audience live. It's one of my favorite things because I love to hear people's stories. And I love to hear, there's even their struggles and what are they going through. And then what I love is that on my channel in particular, and I don't know if you have this on your channel too, my channel members and my viewers will support each other. They'll interact with each other. They'll give each other just kindness for what they're going through. And I remember when I first started doing this, one of my friends was like, "Oh, you're gonna have to be careful. You're gonna need to be really thick-skinned because you're gonna get a lot of pushback. You're gonna get angry comments. You're gonna get, people who tell you that you shouldn't be doing this and whatever." She's like, "I'm worried about you." And then she read the comments on one of my videos and she was like, "This is the kindest comment section I've ever seen on YouTube."
Yeah.
And I would honestly say that, like, for the most part, most of the ex-Mormon content creators that I've seen, their comment sections are incredibly kind. And I think that's because people recognize that a faith crisis is debilitating. They recognize how life-altering it is and how destabilizing it is. And, I do occasionally get that, true believing member who comes on and wants to hate on my channel. But even those people, I'm like, tell me more. Tell me
Yeah.
what you're going through, because I know that what you said this earlier, that when we leave the church or when we step away or when we question, we hold up a mirror for the people who are staying. And it's painful for them to look at because they haven't left. They haven't questioned. And I remember feeling this myself when someone would step away, I would be incredibly sad for that person. And of course, if you care about them, what do you want? You want for them to come back,
Right.
So you're looking for that. What's that magic thing I could say that would make them want to come back? So I get it when people come in the comments and want to say things like that. I understand. But I'm so glad that you're here. I think you lend a unique voice, number one, because you were a bishop. Just number two, because of who you are.
I appreciate that.
Your way of expressing yourself and what's important to you and all of that. I'm so grateful to know a little more in depth about your story, because I saw some of your Facebook posts and I don't really remember exactly how I came across them or what exactly happened, but I just remember reading a couple of them and being like, this is real, this is honest, like this is what it's like to have your entire worldview dismantled for
Right.
you
Yep.
without your choice, and somebody said to me one time, it's like, well, it's like the foundation of your house was God, and then you built this house of Mormonism, and now you're deciding to tear down the whole house. What are you doing? And I was like, I did not tear this house down. I came home one day to find my house in shambles, as if a tornado had been through it.
Yeah.
It was not my choice to do it. Yeah, that's what you get when you build your house in Tornado Alley, I guess. I don't know. It's like
So true. You mentioned your house being there was a time in 2018, December 21st of 2018. So right before Christmas, my wife and I took some time to go to the mountains and hiking, and I was actually kayaking a little bit. And we came home to a house that was burned and gone.
No.
And so I've talked a little bit
Oh my
about
gosh.
that. My kids were there. My daughter's running out while the house is on fire.
Oh
As
my
soon
gosh.
as we were out of cell phone service, and as soon as we got to service, I get a text from my daughter, and it says, we are all okay. And I'm like, what's going
Oh
on?
no.
So that was interesting. And but from that experience, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was see, I had kind of written off the local people, like the local Baptists and, the local, because they were not true, and all they wanted to talk about is getting saved. And
Yeah.
I had sort of written them off. And through that experience, I found out that there were so many good just honest, good people locally. We had people showing up, like we had a better Christmas that year than we've ever had.
Aw.
We had people bringing presents and clothes and all kinds of things, because we had lost, pretty much everything right before all of their presents had burned up and everything, so
Yeah.
so that was something that taught me, like, just faith again in humanity, and and in people. So I talk about that some on my channel, and probably
Yeah.
will more in the future. But yeah. So, anyways, that's my story for the most part, and I'm so glad that I've had this chance to meet you, um, and be able to share that. I'd like to know more about your story, but of course I'll continue to follow your channel and things like that. So.
Well, you can always have me on your channel. I'd be happy to come and answer your questions. But yeah, you and I had not dissimilar journeys. We both were very faithful. I didn't serve a mission because I was married by the time I was 20.
Okay.
And, it was still, the age was still 21 at the time. But my high school friends can attest, like, that it was my dearest wish to serve a mission. Sort of life got in the way, and mainly because of mental health things and whatever. It's a rabbit hole for another time. But I was faithful, and as an adult, attended the temple as often as I could, and was constantly in the temple searching for answers and wondering why I wasn't allowed to be sealed to my children, and why my life had turned out the way that the way that it did when I was trying to do all the faithful things. And I think more than anything else, what disappointed me about the church was that I was promised that if I did all the faithful things, that I would find true joy.
Right.
And that was not my experience.
Right.
And so, if anything, that was the silent shelf item that was like, but why aren't you happy? If you're doing all these things, why aren't you happy? So I greatly appreciate you sharing your story. I can't wait to hear more. I'm definitely going to follow your channel and listen to all your episodes and everything. I think you're headed for great things, and I can't wait for your channel to just blow up and get real big.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate that, and feel the same way about you. And
Thank you.
of course, your channel's already huge, so congratulations. I think you're doing wonderful things. You're helping, no doubt, many people, and just bravo to you, and keep up the awesome, great work.
Thanks. And I think there cannot be enough people in this space talking about this problem, because it's not just Mormonism. It's, modern evangelicalism as well. There are lots of kids leaving, and, it is such a horrific journey that we need all the support that we can get. So I think the more voices that are out here talking about this difficulty and supporting each other, the better. And your voice is going to resonate with so many people, and I'm just glad you're here.
Well, I appreciate that.